Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Capital Conversations. We are on Zoom because last week was the Senate primaries, and that was something that our fabulous Lauren was on the road for. And so, Lauren, why don't you kind of paint me and our viewers and listeners kind of what went down last week?
So much went down last week, and I have talked about this a lot. A lot is going to go down in May. We have a ton of the huge primaries that all of us were watching go into runoffs. I know that you were watching the Attorney General race, and like we were both watching the Tony Gonzalez race over in San Antonio. There was just a lot that unfolded. Texas is a huge state, so traveling the state and covering campaigns is exhausting because it's so much driving, but it was good. I got to talk to voters, and I feel like talking to voters is always a good indicator of what's going to happen. Up in DC, we know what's going to happen in the political sense or like why campaigns are doing what they're doing, but we definitely don't really get to talk to voters that often on why they're voting for somebody or what they're looking for in a candidate. So that was really fun to be on the ground. And like we always say this, whenever we get to cover campaigns, it brings us back down to earth on what voters are looking for and what is really going to shake out in the state. Because I mean, I do think that 50% of campaigns is political and what people in Washington and in the Beltway are saying, but then the other 50% is what voters are going to do. And I think that we often sometimes can get disconnected from that when we are in Washington. So it's always good whenever we get to go travel.
And I think it's interesting too that you make that point because when we're here in Washington, or like if you're on social media, I think a lot of people were expecting Jasmine Crockett to win. I think that people thought that she had the momentum. People thought that because she was super fiery and she had all of the backing on social media, she had the backing of really big Democratic officials. I think that people were expecting her to win. And Republicans really wanted her to win. Republicans wanted her to be the Democratic nominee because for them, they thought that the campaign attack ads would just like write themselves. I would have loved to see Jasmine Crockett debate one of the Republican nominees because I think that just would have been a fantastic show to watch. But I think with James Talarico now taking that nomination, that was something that I think to me surprised me. And I feel like that's something that maybe when you were talking to voters, when you were down there, were you surprised that a lot more people were actually going to vote for Talarico over Crockett?
I wouldn't say necessarily surprised. Whenever I was watching it before the results came in, I thought that it was going to be neck and neck. Like I thought that I had no idea who was going to do it, and it was going to be like a 2 point margin, not like a multiple point margin. I thought it was going to be like very much within margin of error of polls. I did talk to a lot of voters that were Crockett voters. Those were more inner city Houston. A lot of black voters did tell me they were voting for Crockett, and every single time without fail, whenever I asked them why they were voting for her, in quotes, she's a fighter. That would be like quote unquote every voter that voted for Crockett. That's exactly what they told me. I was surprised by the margins. There was only a handful of polls, way less polls that had Talarico up than Crockett up. So I think that that's where some of the shock came in. But I mean, if you really look at their campaign styles, it makes sense that Talarico came out on top. Crockett spent less than 5 million on ads, whereas Talarico spent like around 15 million. I think that Jasmine Crockett's campaign really thought that she was going to be able to ride out her name recognition because she does have high name recognition. She gets a lot of viral clips on social media. She has a ton of followers. But Talarico's campaign really did a good job at campaigning in the traditional sense and in the untraditional sense. They did a ton of rallies. They traveled all over the state. They did a lot of ads, but then they also did a lot of new media. Like their campaign worked with a ton of Democratic influencers. I was at his watch party on Tuesday, and there was Olivia Juliana, there was a bunch of Democratic influencers there. And so they really worked well with like combining a traditional campaign with a more new media campaign. Whereas I think Crockett's campaign kind of just cruised and kind of fell back on the fact that she had high name recognition and then had those big endorsements like Kamala Harris.
I think that that's an interesting thing that you mentioned because we do take a look at polls all the time, and polls are often wrong. And I feel like that's
Yeah.
something that as a journalist, like I never really understood. Well, I didn't understand until I became a journalist. Not that I was like tracking polls all the time before I started in this job, but to me, like polling was like you were getting the thoughts of the voters. Like going in, like that was what it was going to be. And like time after time again, I'm seeing that these polls are just not accurate. And I think that that is interesting that he had this campaign strategy to reach out to both traditional voters and to younger voters who are on social media, where Jasmine Crockett was kind of dominating. But also, we had talked about this before in multiple episodes that Jasmine Crockett was getting a ton of influence and support from people outside of Texas. And so I think that that built up her momentum because there are people in other states who are reposting her videos and, advocating for people to vote in Texas. But when it came down to the actual state of Texas, it sounds like Talarico had a better grasp on not only like what voters wanted out of their Democratic nominee, but how to get that message to them.
I also think that Talarico ran a very Texas campaign, whereas Crockett necessarily, I think that Crockett's campaign appealed more at a national level. I still think Talarico's campaign appealed at a national level. Every single time I posted anything about Talarico, I got so many comments, so many swipe ups on my stories being like, I'm a voter in North Carolina, I'm a voter in Arizona, and I support Talarico. So I'm not saying that Talarico does not have national support, but he ran such a Texas campaign. Every photo op had the Texas flag behind him. Every rally they handed out Texas flags. So like any optics you saw or any videos of any rally, there's just Texas flags being waved anywhere. He wore a suit jacket, but he wore Wrangler jeans and Lucchese boots at every rally, which is Texas brands. Like he just ran a very at its core Texas campaign, and I think that a lot of Texas Democrats resonate with that Texas vibe, but Republicans kind of do take that like the Republicans kind of have dominated Christianity in recent decades. They've really dominated the patriotism. And I think that Talarico brought patriotism and Christianity over to the left and really brought out voters that have felt left out, like voters that are patriotic and are Christian but align more with the left or align more independent. And he really pulled out a lot of voters that are not typically politically active.
And that's really interesting because I think that's what's going to make this race, then the general election, so much harder for Republicans because I think that Republicans were hoping it was going to be Jasmine Crockett because then it was going to be kind of another referendum on Democrats and their progressive agenda versus Republicans. And that could have been something that I would say, and you probably could ascertain that in the state of Texas, that probably wouldn't fly. I think that what we saw from Talarico was trying to bring Democratic agenda policies kind of into the middle again, whereas it's kind of drifted to the left. And in some states, that's working. Obviously, we saw New York City, that worked. But like you're seeing in the states like New Jersey and Virginia, like those members brought over like centrist, moderate kitchen table issues. And that was helping them win. It helped them win the primaries. It helped them win against Republicans in their races in last November. So this time around, it's not surprising to me, I guess, that in a state like Texas that has been predominantly red for a very long time, that those kind of Christian kitchen table issues would be bringing them back to center. And I think that that's going to be it's going to very much impact how Republicans switch up their campaign tactics. We're already seeing on social media that they're trying to go back and find these tweets that Talarico put out like 5 years
It's
ago.
like they had a vault. Like I swear they had a
They
vault.
were probably ready. I'm sure
Yeah.
they were the second that he was
Like the
getting up
tweets,
there, they were
yes.
like, let's go. And I I am curious to see though whether Republicans will learn from this race that social media isn't everything. Because if social media was everything, I think Crockett would have won. But for them to keep reposting on X and pushing out like tweets that Talarico said like 6 years ago, it could impact voters, but I don't know if it's going to do what they hope it does. And I think that they're just kind of waiting for him to screw up so they can keep like blasting stuff out. But I don't know if you would agree with this, but I would say for the majority of his campaign, he did not really have many screw ups at all.
No. I mean, I'm trying to think of what in his campaign happened that really received scrutiny. I mean, there's a lot of things that he said like 5, 6 years ago that Republicans are scrutinizing now, but I hate to say this because it is flawed in what the sentence I'm about to say, but he ran a near perfect campaign. Like, he really didn't mess up. We saw that little blip in the system whenever that Democratic influencer came out and said that in a private conversation, Talarico had called Colin Allred, the former Democratic Senate nominee in Texas, a mediocre black man. That really did take off across social media, but that was hearsay. Like nothing was on video, nothing was hard evidence. It was all alleged. Talarico addressed it and said that he did say that Colin Allred is a mediocre campaigner, but he didn't address it by race. And so that was really the only blip in the system whenever it came to this campaign, but that was also once again alleged. Nothing was out there, nothing was proven on video, no audio was leaked. It really was just hearsay that kind of took off on some some social media platforms, which it was really interesting because I think his team is doing an incredible job. They're running a huge operation. They have so many volunteers. They have a huge press team. They have a digital partnership person on their campaign. I talked to the guy who got the Stephen Colbert interview, and he was like, "That is like the end all be all. That's going to be at the top of my resume for the rest of my life." And like that's what I'm most proud of. And so I think that they're just running an absolutely incredible campaign for somebody that was a state representative.
Well, that's I think what's interesting too is that somebody who is a state level lawmaker is now kind of making the jump to the Senate. And I find that to be so interesting because people, I think, in the Democratic Party have been looking for new blood for a long time. And on the progressive side, they've been looking for younger, grassroots, super progressive people to hop in there. But I think what the Democrats have been lacking are these younger centrist members who are going to kind of bring over a lot of those voters that got turned off by Democrats in the 2024 election. And they thought that President Trump was going to give them kind of bring everything back to normal. And I think that what we've seen from this administration is a lot of voters now are now like, oh crap, I'm not getting normal, but Democrats aren't normal either. So like, where do I fit in? And I think you said it perfectly that like Talarico is offering this space for some of these voters or some of these people who maybe are Republicans or maybe are independents or Democrats that don't feel like they can talk about the normal stuff anymore because social media has just heightened all these super left or super right stances. But most of America is in the middle. And
Mhm.
so like I think that that's why this race is going to be particularly interesting because depending on who wins between Cornyn or Paxton will really up the game of how these candidates respond to things. Because I think if it's, I don't know, I guess maybe, and I'll get your opinion on this. I don't think Talarico is going to like switch up his tactic and go like super attack mode. He didn't
No,
seem to be very
not
like
at all.
aggressive, but like I think the campaign strategy against Paxton I mean, I think the strategy against Paxton will kind of just write itself. I think they have a lot of distinct differences that will just kind of push things along. But if it is a Talarico Cornyn, it's going to be a establishment Republican running for re-election versus a centrist of sorts, Talarico, who wants to kind of bring everybody to the middle. And I think that that's going to be both sides are going to have a hard time
Yeah.
attacking each other, I think.
Yeah. I don't think that Talarico at any point in the campaign, regardless of the Republican nominee, is going to go to that. I had a really interesting thought whenever I was at his rally last week. He said Donald Trump's name 2 times in his hour speech. One
You
of
don't hear
those,
that very often anymore.
one-
Usually
and
that's like the leading the leading
yes,
topic.
one of those was to talk about his Colbert interview not being aired. And so it was not even like really slamming on Donald Trump. It was just saying like Donald Trump and his administration like did this, this, and this to make my interview not be aired. The second time that he named Donald Trump was to say, if you voted for Donald Trump, you are welcome here. I
Which
was
that's
like,
kind of crazy. That's an interesting you
yes,
don't hear that a lot from an opposing party anymore.
yes. He did not say Jasmine Crockett's name at all in his hour-long speech. So I really think that he is trying to get away from this like aggressive attacking politics. Because if you look at his policies, he is a pretty progressive candidate. And he has really done a great job at taking his progressive policies and messaging it down here. That is where the Democratic Party, we've talked about this so much, has messed up. The Democratic Party cannot bring messaging back to the basics. Like they get into this
And
habit
that's
of
how
like,
it makes candidates like him seem centrist. Like
yeah,
if you were
totally.
looking at Talarico versus Crockett, you would think Talarico is the more centrist candidate. And so he's
Which,
like centrist of sorts because of the way he's speaking and the way that he's presenting himself. But yeah,
yes.
if you actually look at his policies, and I think that that's where Republicans could potentially hone in when
Yes.
they're doing these campaign
Completely.
ads against him,
Mhm.
is they can't really attack him for his personality. They can't really attack him for his faith. They can't attack him on some of these other levels that they would have been able to do with Crockett. But I think you're right that I think the reason why people maybe liked him a lot, and even you saw some conservatives of independence liking him, is
Mhm.
because the characteristics and the persona he puts on is that he is willing to be normal and work in the middle and work
Mhm.
down here. Whereas what we've seen a lot from other candidates is like getting so loud up here that it kind of just drowns
Yeah.
out everything else that's happening.
Yeah. And I would even say, I mean, I think that Mamdani is much more left liberal than Talarico, but I
Oh
think
yeah.
they are very similar in the aspect that they are both very progressive, but they campaign right here. They're like, oh, you can't afford a house? I'm gonna fix that. Oh, you have problems with your neighbors? I can help you with that. It's like I'm trying to think of the exact quote. I can't think of it right now, but in Talarico's speech that he gave, his victory speech, he had like a one-line sentence where he essentially wrapped up like, people can't afford groceries, people can't afford buying a house. I'm here to help you with that, and I'm here to fix that. And it's just that like p calling out all the problems that average Americans are having and telling them that they're going to fix that in a simple way is really appealing right now.
Well, it's appealing also because I think a lot of candidates are trying to ride, and this goes for Democrats and Republicans. They're trying to ride off of the Trump administration. So
Mhm.
Republicans will talk about everything in a national sense of like Trump's amazing. Democrats are talking about things in a national sense where Trump's awful. And I think that what that does is it can really hurt people in these competitive races because as much as the Trump administration is impacting a lot of lives right now, everyday lives of everyday Americans. A lot of everyday Americans, and you see this on in polls, you see it, I'm sure when you were talking to voters, I know when I was talking to voters last November, like people just want to be able to afford things.
Mhm.
People just want common sense policies. And so if you are able to just talk about that directly and appeal to your state, because it sounds like if Talarico didn't even say Donald Trump's name, he wasn't saying like I'm going to the Senate because I'm gonna screw over Donald Trump and his cronies, which we hear a lot. He was saying like I'm going to the Senate because I want you people who elected me in the state to be able to afford this, this, and this. And like that is something that I think that both parties have gotten away from. They've nationalized their campaigns. And yes, sometimes they need it, especially if you're a Republican, because Trump's endorsement is heavy now.
Mhm.
But for Democrats, we don't have like they don't have this overarching person that has that heavy level of endorsement that Trump and Republicans do. And
Yeah.
so I think that Talarico played that really well, where he decided that, hey, I'm going to nationalize this in the sense where like I'm going to the US Senate, but I'm doing it for you. And I feel like Republican candidates, some of them are starting to get on that track as well. Maybe not in these races, but they're starting to figure that out, especially if they're in like these purple districts.
Yeah. And I mean, it was so interesting. We saw that play out in House races too. There was one incumbent not endorsed by Trump, and he lost re-election. That was Congressman Dan Crenshaw. We saw in the Attorney General race, he hadn't endorsed. You covered that more than I did. And that's going into a runoff if you wanted to talk about any of that a little bit.
Yeah, it's just there's not much to tell. It's just there's so many races that are going to a runoff. And I think that
So
that just
many.
shows and there just shows that I think that Republican voters are motivated, Democratic voters are motivated, and you see that in a couple places. Like you're seeing it with the Attorney General race. Congressman Chip Roy is running for Attorney General. And I think a lot of people thought that he was going to have that on lock, but
Mhm.
now he's in a runoff. And so that's to me something that now, campaign season isn't over. It's time for it's going to go hit in May. And then you have like Tony Gonzalez and Brandon Herrera. That was a race that I think everybody was expecting to hit a runoff because Tony Gonzalez has come out and addressed these affair allegations. He said that it happened, but that he's not going to resign. He's not going anywhere. He's sticking it out. And you're seeing a lot more Republicans kind of trickle out and say that, thanks for admitting this, but now's the time for you to step away. It doesn't seem like he's going to, so it sounds like we will still have that runoff. And that's going to be a very interesting one because
Mhm.
there was, I think, like 4,000 votes that went to one person or another person that was also running in the GOP primary against Gonzalez and Herrera. So those voters also need to have somewhere to go. And that 4,000, I mean, Gonzalez won his last runoff by like roughly 400
Yeah.
votes. So he needs every vote. And so does Herrera. So this is going to be a key time for them to go and advocate to not only those voters that didn't vote for them, that voted maybe for somebody else or just didn't vote. Or Herrera's job is to go to these Gonzalez voters and be like, he did everything that I said he was going
Mhm.
to do. Like, are you going to vote for him now? And I
Yeah.
think that this is going to be a very interesting, this is going to be one of those times where like name recognition is not going to be the most helpful for Gonzalez. A lot of times, a lot of voters see like incumbent or they see representative and they're like, yeah, sure. If they don't know too much about the race, some people get really involved in it and some people don't. But for Gonzalez, I think he's going to probably hate the fact that he has a lot of name recognition in this race.
I think that May 26th is also going to be so interesting because one, primaries are already not typically voted in. They have really low voter turnout, especially in a midterm election. It's not a presidential. a runoff is going to have even lower voter turnout than that. But Texas did surpass records for numbers of people voting in the primaries and early voting. And so I do think that the voter turnout in these runoffs is also going to be very interesting. I don't know about you. I kind of thought Brandon Herrera would kind of take it. I don't think I thought like confidently that he would take it, but I did kind of think that the scandal would hurt Gonzalez a little bit more than it did at the
I
polls.
agree. I was thinking that Herrera was going to pull out
Like a
by like a handful and there
yeah,
was going to be like a recount.
yes,
I
like a
didn't think that there was
50%,
going to,
51%. Yes.
yeah, I thought it was going to be like, oh, maybe he won by,
Hmm.
I don't know, 100 votes and then Gonzalez demands a recount. Like that I was kind of expecting, but the runoff I think was very interesting. And I'm very curious, I guess, just to see kind of like you said, like voter turnout is just so low all the time, but they did have records.
Hmm.
Like are people going to show up en masse for Gonzalez and Herrera? Because I'm not really sure at this time who low voter turnout could hurt more.
I don't know.
Because I think that maybe it would hurt Herrera more because again, like I was talking about, incumbents just fare better in elections. That's just historically how it's been. And if you are someone who votes in a midterm and you vote in a primary and you vote in a runoff, like you are somebody who's locked in and you're keyed in. So that could also be dangerous for Gonzalez because if they are locked in on what's going on with him, this runoff could potentially go badly for him. So I'll be
Mhm.
definitely watching that. And then lastly, before we wrap up, on the Democratic side, we're seeing Colin Allred and Julie Johnson
Yeah.
locked in this runoff, which I think is so interesting. And Al Green and Christian Menefee are in a runoff. And so it's not just Republicans that are having this
Yeah.
kind of like inter-party problems. The Democrats are also having it. And with Colin Allred is interesting because his entry into the race with Julie Johnson was not received very well by a lot of people. They
Not by
thought that it
Julie,
was
that's for sure.
Julie Johnson was not pleased.
And
Like
you
that
know, that's fair. I would have been mad too.
I would have been mad too because she thought she had it going good and then all of a sudden he just decided to jump in. And
Yeah.
now they're in a runoff. Like I would be mad if I were a member.
And
So,
he did better than her, which is interesting. I know that he has higher name recognition. He was the
yeah.
Texas Democratic Senate nominee in 2024. He had been in Congress longer. So name recognition does go a long way. It'll be really interesting. I do think that runoff voters are even more politically active than
Yes.
primary voters. So I don't know what's going to happen in that race with like voters. And same with Menifee. I think that these runoffs are going to be so interesting because these are going to be the most politically active of politically active voters.
Mm.
And which way they go is going to say a lot about where like those plugged in people want the party to go.
Right. Because with Al Green and Christian Menefee's seat, it very much is that like classic story that we're going to be seeing a lot this
Yeah.
cycle of old guard elder Democrats versus the younger, more progressive Democrats. And we're seeing like Al Green, he's said, and Al Green is very progressive. He's been a very staunch progressive for a
Mhm.
very long time. But I think that a lot of people, even like younger progressive grassroots people, even if the person that they're going up against is super progressive, I think they still want to see younger blood in Capitol Hill. I think that they're just kind of tired of seeing these elder members kind of going up there causing trouble, but not really seeing any results. And so we saw that in North Carolina with Valerie Fauci, but her primary opponent ended up dropping out. So they're not going to go. She conceded. So, like, there are some times here where I think we're going to see the progressive movement kind of give up when they want to. But in these runoffs, I think it's going to be a very telltale sign of where the progressive momentum is going and if they can keep it up in 2026.
Yeah. Well, we'll be providing all of the updates until the May 26th runoff and then through the rest of the election. But that's a wrap this week for Capital Conversations with Rachel and Lauren.
And as always, make sure to like and subscribe and follow us on all of our platforms. Y'all know the drill. And read at WashingtonExaminer.com.